Okay, that was a little crazy. Um, for those of you who were watching just a little while ago, well, actually, let me give another minute or two to let people get over to this video. Um, I was actually in the car, and the reception, a little note popped up, and it said the reception was starting to become very bad. And I was like, why would the reception here where I am at that moment be bad? And it stopped the video. It just stopped recording. So I was right outside, so I was able to get out of the car and come inside and get on my Wi-Fi here at the house and kind of make this. But my apologies to those of you who were watching previously, and thank you for those of you who may have just joined. Wanted to kind of continue our conversation from earlier. This is, of course, I'm Julian Nixon. I'm from Connect to Nicu, and this is Father's Fridays. And today's topic is really getting into what is the NICU, and more importantly, how do I wind up in the NICU? Because the NICU, NICU stands for Neonatal Intensive Care Unit. If you've watched movies, action, adventure, dramas, whatever, and you hear about the ICU, then the ICU is the intensive care unit. Well, when you put the N in front of it, that's the neonatal intensive care unit. And oftentimes when people talk about the NICU, they say it's the ICU for really sick babies. And there's a lot of different ways that your child can wind up being in the NICU. And a lot of times when I do these talks, you're going to hear me talk about the fact that you wound up in the NICU, because it's not just the baby in the NICU. It's the whole family. You, the mom, the dad, it's the healthcare providers and the community advocates who wind up in that NICU with you during that time. Oh, and by the way, if you hear any weird noises in the background, that's my dog. He's sitting down here and he's kind of playing with a little toy, keeping himself occupied. But he's half Cocker Spaniel, half Border Collie, so his attention span is going to be there. So anyway, so what's some of the ways that you wind up in the NICU? Well, first and foremost, if your child is born 37 weeks or less, you're more than likely going to go to the NICU. They have a cutoff where they like to see a child at least older than 37 weeks. So sometimes that's a shock and awe to some parents. They think, well, I'm at 36 weeks. Everything should be okay. And then they say, we want your child to stay in the NICU for about a week or 2 weeks before they go home, just to make sure that everything's developed in the way that it should be. So that's one way that your child can wind up in the NICU. And the second way that your child can wind up in the NICU is if they were already monitoring some developmental issues while the child was in the womb. So if they noticed that the child was not developing as quickly as they should, if they were lacking different things, if their organ systems seem to be behind schedule or anything like that, they'll suggest that the child should go to the NICU. The third way that your child can get a free ticket straight to the NICU is if they're underweight. I met a couple one time, a couple of years ago, where the wife was really, really, really worried about gaining weight during her pregnancy, which is understandable. But she had not been adhering to the advice of her physician. So she had been cutting back on a lot of nutrition during the time that she was pregnant. So when it came time around for her to give birth, it was at the normal time, but the doctors told her, hey, since you didn't listen to us, this baby's now underweight. And so this baby's now going to have to stay in the NICU for a little while until we get its weight up before it can go home with you. So that was not a good trade-off. So that's another reason that you could find yourself in the NICU. Another way that you can find yourself in the NICU is if the mom experiences something called preeclampsia. Preeclampsia is something that you can do a lot of research on. My wife had preeclampsia with our son, And since then, I did a lot of research on preeclampsia, did a lot and a lot of reading, a lot of asking of questions. And there are a lot of healthcare professionals and researchers who will tell you that they don't 100% understand preeclampsia. It's not as well understood as some other diseases. In preeclampsia, what happens is the baby and the placenta are releasing these chemicals that have an adverse effect on the mother's body. Some of the side effects can be a drastic increase in blood pressure, swelling, things like that. And so the body of the mom, her response is to release chemicals in a way against the baby and the placenta. And then the baby and placenta respond by releasing more of their chemicals. The mother's body responds by releasing more of her chemicals. And so it becomes what's called a positive feedback loop, where I'm doing something and then it elicits a response that makes me do it even more, which can actually lead to a fatal result. So if the mother is experiencing preeclampsia, they will oftentimes, if they can't get the blood pressure down, if mandatory bed rest won't do it, if administering of drugs won't do it, then they'll wind up having to deliver that child early through C-section, and then that child will go straight to the NICU. So these are just some of the common ways that a child can wind up in the NICU, how you can wind up in the NICU, and it makes it really short and sweet and to the point that you can find yourself there. Another thing too, there's a fifth reason, a fifth thing that can get your baby and you landed in the NICU, and that is if there's been some complications during the pregnancy. If there have been complications during the pregnancy with either the mother, the baby, or both, oftentimes they will submit the baby to the NICU immediately after birth so that they can monitor the child, and they can also monitor the mother. Now, the mother will be in recovery, and the baby, of course, will be in the NICU. And so they'll be reviewing things and monitoring that along the way. When our son was in the NICU, they were monitoring him 24/7. My wife and I one of us were with the baby almost 24/7. There was 1 hour in the 24 hours, believe it or not, there's 1 hour in the 24 hours where we weren't allowed to be in there. And that was because the medical staff were meeting to have a powwow to discuss all the data and all the analysis and assess everything that they had seen with every baby. And they needed to have that time as a staff, as a team, so they could review all of that and figure out were there any changes that they needed to make for that child. And I mean, you could sit there. It was at midnight, from midnight to 1 o'clock, like clockwork. They put everybody out of the NICU. They would meet. When 1 a.m. hit, those doors will open back up. You could go in and you could ask them any questions. A lot of times they'd be waiting on you as soon as you walked. Well, they'd be waiting on us when we walked back in, because they knew we were walking back in with a lot of questions to find out what was going on. So that's Father's Friday for today. Post your comments. Leave us some messages. If there's some key things that you want to talk about, please let us know. Also continue to like us on Facebook. Follow us on Twitter. You can check us out at our blog on our website, connectednicu.com. Bless you, sneezing dog. And we'll be back next Friday. Bless you again. We'll be back next Friday with some more info on Father's Fridays. We'll also be getting into where did our son's nickname come from? Some people who are really close to us, they know where the nickname came from. It's kind of related to one of my old nicknames. But other people, when they meet us and they learn about us and read about things, they don't understand exactly where the nickname came from. So we're going to talk about nicknames. And we're also going to get into, in another Friday, maybe next Friday, it depends on what you guys want to talk about. We might next Friday really get into what should I as a father be doing at the NICU? What can I do for myself when I'm in the NICU? What can I do for my wife or my significant other while she's in the NICU? And what can I do for the baby when I'm in the NICU? So without any more hullabaloo, I'm going to go get some lunch. We'll check you guys out later. Have a great one.